Welcome to Payback with Silas. Every day, a new story, lies, betrayal, payback. Let's begin.
They say a man should leave work with a gold watch and a handshake. Maybe even a cake with his name misspelled on it. I got neither. Monday morning, 7:48 a.m., I was at my desk in the south wing of the ArcLight Financial Building in Denver, Colorado, same spot I'd occupied since 1994. The place still smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. Familiar. Steady. Comfortable. At 8:03, my boss, if you could call him that, walked in. Sterling Grady. Young, slick, always smelled like he dipped his face in cologne and his ethics in kerosene. His tie cost more than my mortgage did in the 80s. "John," he said, hands clasped together like a pastor about to deliver bad news at a funeral. "We need to talk." I knew that tone. I'd used it myself when I was in management, back before the company decided experience was too expensive. We walked into the corner office that used to be mine, back before the reorganization 3 years ago. Grady closed the door and sat where I used to sit. He didn't invite me to take the other chair. I took it anyway. "There's no easy way to say this," he started. "There never is. Due to internal restructuring, your position is being eliminated. Effective immediately." I blinked. Once. Then twice. "That's so?" I asked. "You'll be given a severance package. 4 weeks' pay. HR will follow up with paperwork." "4 weeks?" I chuckled. "After 43 years?" He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Just gave me a rehearsed line about market changes and leaner systems. Said something about how the company appreciated my service, but business is business. Told me it wasn't personal. Of course it wasn't personal. It was profitable. I stood up, nodded once, and walked out without a word. No yelling. No begging. No dramatics. I'd seen too many old dogs humiliate themselves trying to bite a hand that was already gone. I packed my things slowly. Photo of Margaret and me from the Tetons, a pen my daughter gave me when she graduated, and a small brass clock that hadn't ticked in 5 years. My nameplate stayed on the desk. Let them throw it away. No one in the office made eye contact. Most of them were kids. I'd trained half of them. 1 or 2 looked like they wanted to say something, but didn't. I walked out the front doors of ArcLight Financial for the last time. The Colorado wind hit my face like a reminder, you're not owed anything. Not even dignity. I took a breath. One long inhale. Then pulled out my phone. I had one number saved under the name, LW. I hadn't called it in 15 years. But I knew he'd answer. And when he did, all I said was, "Hey Larry, you still looking for someone who knows how to build empires from the bones up?" His laugh cut through the cold like summer lightning. "John Rivers," he said. "I thought you'd never ask." The elevator ride down from the 27th floor was the longest 90 seconds of my life. Strange thing, time. It crawls when you're young and speeds up the moment you start counting years instead of dreams. I stared at my reflection in the brushed steel doors. Same face I'd seen for decades, older, sure, but still standing. Gray at the temples, a permanent line between my brows like life had pressed its thumb there and held it for years. But I looked solid. Grounded. Like a man who was supposed to walk out a hero, not a statistic. When I hit the lobby, Marcus the security guard gave me a confused smile. He was a good kid, ex-military, always called me Mr. Rivers. I nodded back but didn't say a word. I couldn't. Not yet. I stepped out onto 17th Street. Denver air was dry and bright and unforgiving. I took a left toward the parking garage, fishing for my keys, but stopped halfway. Something in me shifted. I didn't want to get in that car. I didn't want to go home to Margaret and explain how 43 years ended with 4 weeks' pay and a speech written by a junior lawyer. I didn't want to sit in our kitchen pretending this wasn't a wound that bled pride. So instead, I walked to a little place called the Rusted Elk, a bar I used to stop by back when we closed big deals and celebrated like men who believed in the future. It was empty. Tuesday early, I sat at the bar, ordered black coffee, and stared at the cracked varnish on the counter. Then I pulled out my phone again. Larry West. My old college roommate. Back then, I was the strategist, and he was the hustler. He could sell snow in Alaska and make you thank him for it. After college, he went west and started building companies like they were Lego sets. Tech logistics. A media arm. A hedge fund. And a year ago, I read somewhere that he'd launched a startup incubator in Austin. I hadn't spoken to him in a decade and a half. I didn't know if the number still worked. But when I called, he picked up after 2 rings like he'd been expecting me. "John Goddamn Rivers," he said, laughing like we were 25 again. "Tell me you're finally tired of corporate slow death." "I got laid off," I said. "Week before retirement." He went quiet. Real quiet. Then he said, "How fast can you get on a plane?" "Depends. What am I flying toward?" "A team of 20-year-old idiots with ideas and no clue how to lead. I've been looking for someone with scars. Someone who knows how the world actually works." I didn't even hesitate. "I'll be there tomorrow." I didn't go home that night. I called Margaret from the Rusted Elk. She listened without interrupting. That's her way. Calm in every storm. "Go," she said finally. "Just don't forget to eat something besides bar peanuts." God, I love that woman. The next morning, I was on a flight to Austin with one carry-on, a suit, and a fire in my chest I hadn't felt since 1987. They wanted to toss me out like expired inventory. They didn't realize they just cut loose the man who built half their damn empire. And I was ready to build something bigger. From scratch. Austin greeted me with heat and noise. Not the kind that smothers you like in Houston. No, Austin had a different energy. It buzzed. Like a city halfway between genius and madness. Between billion-dollar unicorns and kids coding in garages with ramen breath. Larry picked me up himself in a black '73 Chevy El Camino, because of course he did. He always had a thing for style that made a statement. Aviators on, white Oxford shirt, sleeves rolled, hair still thick and cocky gray. "You look good," he said, squinting at me. "I just got laid off by a guy who still wears loafers with no socks." "Don't lie to me, Larry." He laughed. "You still got that knife behind your words." Damn, I missed that. The ride to his office was short. Warehouse district turned hipster tech haven. Big glass doors, exposed brick, the faint smell of kombucha and ambition. Inside, there were maybe 24 people, most of them half my age and dressed like they were on their way to a music festival or a chess tournament, hard to tell which. "Welcome to West Ventures," Larry said, spreading his arms. "You're about to meet the future, and let's be honest, it's a mess." And it was. The place had energy, sure, but it was chaotic. Startups with terrible names like Snacksley and Quanta. Founders talking over each other in boardrooms, pitching ideas that sounded like someone fed ChatGPT too much Red Bull. And under all the noise, I could feel it. No direction. No grown-ups in the room. They didn't need inspiration. They needed discipline. Strategy. War plans. They needed someone who knew how to carry a company through the fire, not just light it. Larry walked me through the space, introducing me like I was some legend from another time. "This guy ran East Coast operations for Arclight before most of you were out of middle school," he said. "He kept a Fortune 500 above water during the 2008 crash. He knows how to scale, how to structure, and how to say no to bad ideas before they bankrupt your runway." I didn't say much. Just shook hands, made mental notes. A few of them looked at me like I was their dad. A few like I was a threat. But one kid, tall, glasses, sweat-stained t-shirt, looked me in the eye and said, "We're glad you're here. We're drowning." Honesty. I liked him immediately. We went into Larry's glass-walled office. He poured 2 bourbons, Balcones, good Texas stuff. "What do you want out of this, John?" he asked. I thought about it. "I want to prove they were wrong," I said. "Arclight?" "No," I said. Everyone who thinks experience is a liability. Larry nodded slowly. You're not here to fade out, then. I looked out at the floor of 20-somethings burning money and caffeine like rocket fuel. No, I said. I'm here to take command. He slid a folder across the desk. Start here. They're called Delta Forge. AI-based supply chain optimizer. 2 brilliant engineers, no leadership, no revenue model, and no plan past next Tuesday. Fix it, and the rest of them will fall in line. I opened the folder, saw the numbers. Bad, chaotic, full of potential. And for the first time in months, I smiled. They'd taken my office, my title, my pension. Now I was going to take something from them. Relevance, power, legacy. And this time, I wasn't asking anyone's permission. I started with Delta Forge. 2 founders, Ethan Klein and Maddox Silva. Both brilliant in a way that was just shy of dangerous. Ethan had a kind of jittery intensity, always talking with his hands like his thoughts were too fast for language. Maddox was quieter, calculating, eyes always half a second ahead of the room. Together, they were building something that, if it worked, could change how global supply chains functioned. Real-time optimization using predictive AI, machine learning, and a model so complex I had to reread the white paper 3 times just to get a sense of it. But their company? A disaster. They'd burned through $2 million in seed funding and were 3 weeks from hitting zero. No CFO. No operations lead. No customer pipeline. No pitch deck worth a damn. Just a wall of post-it notes, a shared Google Drive, and something they kept calling their vision, like it could substitute for structure. I asked for a war room. Larry cleared out a small conference room on the 2nd floor. No beanbags, no ping-pong table, no kombucha. Just a long oak table, a whiteboard, and 2 giant notepads. I had one rule: no laptops, no phones. First meeting, Ethan almost argued. Then he saw the look on my face. We got to work. I started with a simple question. Who is your customer? They gave me a 7-minute answer. I stopped them after 2. If you can't say it in 1 sentence, you don't know, I told them. By the end of that first session, I'd torn their model apart. Not because it was bad, because it was untested. Because they were so afraid to be wrong, they hadn't tried to be right. No pilots. No calls. No risk. Perfection is the enemy of money, I said. You don't need a masterpiece. You need a product someone will pay for. Maddox looked like he wanted to argue. Ethan looked like he wanted to throw up. Good. I was getting through. The next 2 weeks were a blur of late nights, black coffee, hard truths. I brought in a friend, Sheila Dominguez, ex-operations head from a firm I worked with in Chicago. Smart as hell and meaner than me. She whipped them into shape on the back end while I trained them on investor language, pitch discipline, and the value of silence in a negotiation. We built a new deck from scratch. Condensed the product into 4 words: real-time supply chain intelligence. Booked 6 meetings with mid-sized logistics firms and courted one big fish, Velmax Distribution, a national freight player out of Salt Lake City. Ethan nailed the pitch. Maddox showed restraint I didn't think he had. They got a commitment, $400,000 pilot over 6 months. Contingent on results. I took them to a steakhouse that night. The bill was insane. Worth every damn cent. Back at West Ventures, word started spreading. The old guy had pulled Delta Forge back from the cliff. Larry started calling me the fixer, like I was some mob lawyer from a Scorsese film. Other founders started dropping by. Some with real questions. Some with ego in their eyes. Didn't matter. I wasn't there to play dad. I was there to build killers. One night, Ethan pulled me aside in the hallway. Why are you doing this? He asked. You don't need to. You've already done your time. I looked at him, and for a second, I saw myself in his place. 30 years ago, before the suits and the boardrooms and the betrayals. Back when the work was everything and the game still felt fair. I'm doing this, I said, Because someone tried to tell me I was finished. And I don't like being told who I am. He nodded slowly. Then said something I'll never forget. Then let's show them what finished really looks like. By the end of the month, Delta Forge was cash positive, had a roadmap, a client, and 2 investors circling. And me? I had momentum. And momentum, I've learned, is the one thing you can't fake in this life. Once it starts rolling, it crushes everything in its path. A month into my new life, I stopped waking up angry. Not because I forgave what they did at Arclight, no. That wound still had teeth. But because, for the first time in years, I wasn't playing defense anymore. I wasn't managing decline or squeezing blood from quarterly reports. I was building again. Delta Forge was just the first domino. After their turnaround, every founder in West Ventures suddenly wanted a piece of my time. I started charging them for it, not money, but effort. If you want my eyes, I said, you bring your numbers, your failures, and your ego checked at the door. Some couldn't handle it. One kid, Jonah something, stormed out halfway through a session because I told him his entire business model was a glorified app for telling people when to water their plants. Which it was. The truth hurts. But most of them stayed. And got sharper. One afternoon, Larry pulled me into his office. No bourbon this time, just him, leaning on his desk with that same wild grin he had in college. You're causing trouble, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Good trouble or bad? The kind that makes people uncomfortable. The kind that shakes up their comfort zones. I like it. He tossed me a file. Stonebridge Capital. A mid-tier private equity firm. One of Arclight's longtime partners. They were sniffing around West Ventures. Word was, they wanted a stake, an influence. They're offering 8 figures for 22%, Larry said. It's tempting. I opened the file. I knew the names. I knew the games. They'd take the 22%, then start rewriting the rules. Within 2 years, West Ventures would be just another corporate puppet show with bean counters in every room. They'll gudge you, I said. I know. That's why I wanted your eyes on it. I closed the folder. Then here's your answer, no? And not just no, hell no. Larry smiled. Thought so. That night, something in me clicked. I wasn't just helping kids keep their startups alive. I was guarding the last honest frontier of capitalism, the kind where the people who built something still got to own it. A week later, I got an email. From Sterling Grady. Subject, opportunity for discussion. I stared at the screen for a long time before I opened it. He wrote like a politician, polite, vague, nauseating. He said Arclight was undergoing another transition. They were launching an innovation division, exploring strategic partnerships with early-stage tech companies. He'd heard through mutual contacts that I was consulting in that space. Asked if I'd be open to a call. I sat with it for a while. Then I replied with 3 words. I'm not available. Didn't sign my name. Didn't need to. 2 days later, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade, Catherine Brandt, former EVP of Arclight. She'd left years before things turned sour and built a venture consultancy in Seattle. Said she heard I'd set fire to the retirement myth and wanted to collaborate. She didn't ask what happened at Arclight. She knew. She'd seen it before. We talked for 2 hours. By the end of the call, we were drawing up a plan. A new fund. Joint venture. Experienced founders only. No suits, no fluff, no kids playing CEO. She already had investors lined up. I already had founders who were hungry. That night, Margaret and I sat on the back porch, watching the Texas stars. I told her everything. She just smiled, took my hand, and said, You know you're not retiring ever, right? Guess not, I said. Turns out I've still got gas in the tank. She looked at me like she did when we first met, like I was dangerous again. And I liked it. I'd been thrown out. Written off. Forgotten. But they made one mistake. They thought I was working for the gold watch. I wasn't. I was working to build something that couldn't be taken from me. And now, I was just getting started. 6 months after the day they let me go, I walked into the same hotel ballroom where ArcLight used to host their annual leadership summits. I'd been here dozens of times before, sometimes as a speaker, sometimes as the guy behind the curtain pulling the strings. But this time, I wasn't on the guest list. This time, I was the keynote. Catherine and I had officially launched our venture group, Ironwood Circle. Old school minds for a new school economy. Founders over 40. Operators with scars. No smoke, no mirrors, just execution. The press called it a defiant answer to ageism in Silicon Valley. I didn't correct them. We raised $40 million in 3 months. Larry chipped in. So did Sheila. Even Ethan and Maddox, now fully funded and expanding Delta Forge into 3 new markets, sent a check with a note that said, "Thanks for teaching us how to fight." But the moment I knew I'd really won was that night at the ballroom. ArcLight had rented the space for their innovation showcase. I wasn't invited, of course, but West Ventures was. And guess who Larry asked to represent them? That's right. I didn't come out of spite. I came out of principle. I wanted every young founder, every investor, every mid-level suit in that room to see what experience with teeth looks like. They introduced me as a legend in operational leadership. I got up, adjusted my cufflinks, and walked to the podium slow. No PowerPoint. No flash. Just truth. I was let go from a company I gave 43 years to. I started a week before retirement. They called it restructuring. I call it a favor. There were laughs. Nervous ones. Grady was somewhere in the back. I could feel him stiffen. I looked out over the crowd. You see, they thought I was a relic. But what they forgot, what too many forget, is that men like me don't stop building. We don't fade. We evolve. I told them about Delta Forge. About Ironwood. About the future I was backing now, one made of grit, wisdom, and consequence. And I ended with this. Legacy isn't a plaque. It isn't a pension. It's what you leave standing when they try to bury you. When I stepped off that stage, I didn't shake hands. I shook foundations. Margaret and I moved to a place just outside Austin. Big porch. Sunrises you can hear. I work from the study now, not because I have to, but because I love it. There's always one more founder to sharpen. One more fight worth showing up for. Some people still ask me if I'm angry at how it ended. I tell them it didn't end. They just turned the page too early. Because this is the second act. And I'm writing it on my terms.